your thoughts are really powerful, and the way that you think is really powerful. And I love this idea that your thoughts are these kind of energetic bodies that get released into the ether, which comes back to what you were talking about, the vibration of how you say something.
Yes.
And so I think that how we think and how we speak is so powerful and has a measurable impact on our cellular well-being and how we're feeling in the world. And so I think that there's enormous potential for these drugs opening new pathways for mankind.
Hi, I'm Carla. You're listening to Free to Be Curious. I've named this podcast after the values of freedom and curiosity. These inform and motivate the self-directed lifestyle choices that my family and I enjoy. I hope my guests inspire you as much as they inspire me. Welcome back to the Free to Be Curious podcast. We post weekly and we record our podcasts in the riverside.fm online recording studio, and we use Buzzsprout to host our RSS feed. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Deezer, Amazon, and YouTube. Hit subscribe on our YouTube channel and click the bell icon to be notified when new episodes are released. Head on over to my website and sign up for our newsletter too, as that way you'll stay up to date with all our releases, promos, discount codes, and more. Join me on these socials, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. All of these links are in the description below and in the show notes. Our guest today is Dr. Skye Scott from Health with Heart. Dr. Skye runs this unique family GP practice here in Joburg with her partner, Dr. Whitfield. Their niche is in holistic family medicine, and they take an integrative and functional approach to treating their patients. Skye, I love what you do in your practice and how you're someone so for the holistic take on this whole thing that we call existence in the world. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Skye, I'd love to start talking a bit about why you chose to study medicine in the first place, what influenced you to go that route, and then stick with it to the extent that you opened your own GP practice, and more specifically, the integrative medicine practice that you have.
So, Carla, if I'm honest, I don't have the clearest memory I actually have is being on my gap year, which was the year I took between school and study. And I had been working as a waitress in London, slugging my guts out and saving pounds. And then I went on a little traveling expedition with a good friend of mine. And I remember being on the island of Corfu in Greece with her and her boyfriend who had arrived and her mother who had arrived. And I wasn't having a particularly fabulous time. And my mom was emailing me and saying, you know, the applications for university next year are closing. Can I apply for you? What can I apply for? And I had a lot of options in my mind, and I was mulling them all over anxiously and not sure what to do. And I remember being in a little car with my friend's mom, and we were driving along the coast of Corfu, and she is cat mad. She's got a whole lot of cats in her home, and there was a dead cat in the middle of the road. And she pulled over to the side of the road, and she said, "I'm not moving this car until one of you moves that poor cat out of that roadkill out of the way." And we kind of all sat there a little bit awkwardly for a few moments, and there was a magazine at my feet, and I tore the center pages out of the magazine, and I went and I don't know, I had this kind of illuminated moment moving this dead cat out of the road, and a large part of its head had been sliced open, so it was sort of like a cross-section of its head. And one might think that this would have sent me on a veterinary science trajectory, but animals have never really been my thing. And I moved the cat, and after that lunch, I went home and emailed my mom and said, please apply for med school. And to cut a long story short, I thought that I had been rejected, and so I ended up doing a mixture of social sciences for a year. And halfway through that year, a friend said, you know, there's med school entrance exams next month. Why don't you try again? And I went to the department, and I hadn't even known that there were entrance exams the first application. So I followed that journey, and I got in. And I suppose I only really knew that I was in the right place when I failed my biochem exam at the end of first year. And I was in the Skye wandering around, not quite in a loincloth, but close to the earth, and trying to get enough reception to download my marks. And when I realized, standing on that hill in the Skye, that I'd failed biochemistry and that the consequences of that would be very dire, I think I really digested that I was on the right path and that I needed to get back in my car, drive all the way home, and start studying for the rewrite, which I did.
Wow.
And thankfully, that was the last exam that I neglected. So that's sort of a long, the long journey to becoming a doctor. And I don't ever remember having doubt along the way. That sort of biochemistry moment was a turning point for me, and I realized that I was in the right place, doing the right thing.
Yeah, I suppose when you felt the loss, it was like the sign that
it
was for you.
It's a terrible hallmark of human nature that we only appreciate things when they're potentially taken away from us.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah,
it means it's important. Yeah.
And then starting a GP practice, I think that young people today, in the context of social media and the digital world, are exposed to so much more and have clear ideas from younger about what their futures might look like. And if you told me that I'd be doing what I'm doing now 10 years ago, I would have probably giggled. So I got a few locum jobs as a GP after I finished medical school, mostly because I just couldn't fathom going back into the system and doing calls and dealing with the brokenness of it all. And one of my jobs of 3 was with Melinda. And it wasn't long before her and I were working really collaboratively and growing the practice quite fast. And we've been on a really organic journey ever since then. And our skill set has grown, and our exposure to integrative medicine has added a lot of nuance to our world and our medical world and the way that we work. So yeah, I just followed my feet, I guess, from that Skye aha moment, and it landed me where I am now.
I actually noticed, since I've known you for about 4 years, I think at least, and I've noticed this development in terms of the practice and growing it, and just from talking to you, how organically stuff has happened. But you guys are really not just ordinary GPs, if I could put it that way. Health with heart means something more, and I think you're different from the standard in terms of your values as GPs in your practice, and I think it's a lot to do with that path of taking the integrative medicine approach. So what is it that integrative doctors do or know and then do differently from sort of the mainstream?
So I find this journey difficult to navigate because I feel like I wear different hats in different contexts. And unfortunately, historically, medicine has been really binary. Either you are a pharmaceutical doctor or you are not a pharmaceutical doctor, and there isn't really an in-between. And I find that frustrating. So if I say something too functional or integrative in a pharmaceutical context, people will look at me and question my legitimacy. And the opposite is true of the inverse. And I suppose I've been doing this for long enough now to get a little bit more, to be more comfortable with my own worldview and the way that I practice. And I don't mind ruffling a few feathers. But the word integrative essentially talks about interconnectedness. And I think in your introduction, you alluded to my sort of worldview of connectedness. And more and more we're understanding that all of our organ systems are connected. So historically, you'd go to a cardiologist for a heart problem or a neurologist for a brain problem. But there are communications in both directions between all of these organ systems. Your skin is communicating with your cardiovascular system. Your brain is communicating with your gut. There's all these high information highways communicating all the time. And so I suppose that's the foundation philosophy of an approach to a patient, that you're healing a whole person, not just hypertension. Why is this person hypertensive? Are they overweight? Do they smoke? Are they anxious? What is their genetics? What is their hormone profile? How inflamed are they? And you really take a step back and look at the whole person. And then the other way in which the word integrative applies is to draw wisdom from different places. And there are so many ancient medical traditions or healing traditions that I think bring with them so much healing and so much wisdom that isn't always science-based, although the science is catching up with the wisdom. And I think that most doctors are wired in a way that they want things to be black and white and 1 + 1 = 2. And I suppose what makes me a little bit different is that I don't mind being in the gray area, and I don't mind not understanding why something works. And it's in those moments that I have to take off my sort of MBCHB doctor hat and put it down so that I don't offend anybody or compromise my legitimacy in the binary world. So I hope I've answered the question.
Oh, that was such a beautiful answer. Honestly, I'm moved by your answer because, I'm not a doctor at all, and I don't have any medical qualifications at all, but just to hear someone speak about considering like the ancient wisdom from hundreds of years of healing that was really happening is incredible. And I just love what you say. I actually never thought of integrative medicine as being integrative as in the whole body of knowledge around healing. I really only thought it was, like you said, the interconnectedness of the body. So it's actually moved me to hear that's like the understanding of it.
I think that part of the deep pathology of where we are in the world today is a disconnect from all of that, from that network, and from understanding ourselves as an extension of the natural world and as an extension of one another. I think that there's a lot of collective healing that needs to happen on that level. We've sort of moved, agree. Yeah, we've moved to this very individualistic.
We are in silos, literally. I'm in my silo, and you're in your silo, and somehow we need to function in a silo.
Even the way we're having this conversation through a screen is disconnected in a way, energetically. Hopefully we'll make up for it, but.
Yeah, no, energetically, I've sorted us, Skye. I have a whole energy field that's literally with you in your practice at Health with Heart.
Thank goodness.
I promise you I've sent it. Amazing. I started sending it weeks ago.
Well received. So I think we need to focus on things like that. And, I think that your body can hear the way that you think, and the people around you can hear and feel the way that you think. And
I always say, like, vibrationally, my children are literally picking up on whatever my vibration is. So I might say something like, yes, sure, you can, eat that thing that's full of chemicals and sugar, no problem. But, like, my vibration is, ew, don't you dare touch that thing. Like, don't do it. So they're just picking up on the vibration, in all honesty. Like, that's the truth. People are picking up on those things, especially people close to you. So, I get that. And when it comes to modern living, the pace of our lives and all that stuff really means that wellness doesn't happen by default like it would if we lived more closely to nature and more connectedly. So is there anything we can do from an integrative perspective as these modern people living in our cities and our silos, so removed from nature, that we can make up for what we're lacking in some way?
I think that there's lots that we can do. I'm not confident that we can do enough, to be honest, to undo all of the bad wiring that it's reinforcing. But I think that just bringing mindfulness and awareness and an intentionality, if that's a word, to solving that problem is a first step. And so if you can begin by understanding that you are not your job, and you can create better boundaries between your work life and your recreational and your family life, and your investment in your physical body life. There's just so many areas where we need to invest, and I think that because of the way that capitalism drives the whole system, everybody's most invested in their bottom line, which is understandable. We've all got bills to pay and children to educate. But if we collectively push back on that narrative and are committed to going home at a certain time so that we can exercise and cook a healthy meal and sit with our families and eat it, and go for a walk after dinner in a safe park with our feet on the ground, then I think that we can begin to shift things. But we need to invest more worth in There's almost it's like a naughty badge to say I pulled an all-nighter, or I'm surviving on 4 hours of sleep. And there's this push to fit in more and achieve more and diversify more and have a side hustle. And it's just too much. I don't think that we were evolved to deal with that kind of level of stimulation. And then you've got screens. So you've got all these screen inputs distracting you all the time and giving you these really easy dopamine hits that you could achieve with a little bit of breath work or a walk on a mountain, but it's much faster to just scroll or open your phone. And so I think it's getting more and more difficult to achieve what you're saying is so essential.
Right. I remember this expression, like, you spend your health to get wealth, but there's actually no way you can spend all your wealth to get back your health.
Exactly.
It's a spending thing. It's like, what do you choose to spend?
Yes, and I think
say you...
Yeah. It also, I think it comes back to, we're only really appreciating something once you've lost it. And often say to patients, what needs to happen for you to change your behavior? Do you need to have a heart attack? Do you need to have a stroke? Do you need to be incapacitated? When do you draw the line? And often it's too late. And then it's very hard to unwind the damage. But I think that on a more positive note, that there is certainly a more public discourse around well-being. And I think COVID shone quite a bright light on mental health as something that people need to invest in. And, you need to cultivate daily practices that keep you feeling content and keep you feeling calm. It's not always a default mode for everybody.
So what daily practices, would you recommend? Like you mentioned, a walk, finish work early, walk.
Well, so let's start with
be
sleep.
With your family.
Because I think sleep,
please start there.
Sleep does not get enough airtime.
God. That's the one exam
people,
I've never passed, Skye, seriously.
Oh, well, you've got too many
I've
children in your
exam.
bed.
No, never. I've never slept. Sleep never came easy my whole life.
Easily too. So I mean, there are people like that.
I've never passed sleep.
There are people like that.
Sleep and I are in a rocky relationship. But start off by talking about sleep in general.
Well, I think Huberman recently did an interesting podcast on sort of power naps, where you're not even really asleep, you're just deeply relaxed, and that had quite positive, measurable outcomes. So maybe you need to schedule some power restoring naps. But anyway, I think that most people need about 8 hours of sleep. There are very few people that have a specific gene that exempts them of that requirement. And so people that tell you they're doing really well on 4 or 5 or 6 hours are not really. There's that wonderful book by Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep. And he talks about quite a lot of studies where they compare people who are drunk in a car to people who are sleep deprived in a car, and they measure their response time. And the people that are sleep deprived are much slower to respond than the drunk people. And so I think that's something that we need to all work hard on revering. Sleep is so important.
So what can you do? What's the secret? What should you do? I know there's sleep hygiene as a philosophy, but maybe you can just, overarching principles.
Yeah, sure. So sleep hygiene is very simply no screen time at least an hour before bed. No bright lights in your eyes. Setting in the same way that we have bedtime rituals for our children. We have dinner and we bath and soothe them, and then we read them a story, and then we make sure they're all comfy and warm. We need to do the same for ourselves. So if you're watching a thriller or working on your laptop until 2 minutes before midnight and then jumping into bed and expecting to drift off into La La Land, that's not probably going to happen. And stimulants, coffee. We're also in the midst of this boom of coffee culture, and everybody is downing 6 to 8 cups of coffee a day. Caffeine's got an almost 12-hour half-life, and so I don't recommend any coffee after 10. And there are other stimulant-containing drinks that people drink. There's lots of energy drinks. I think even Cola Tonic has got caffeine in, so start to read the labels and hydrate yourself on caffeine-free herbal teas through the day or water. Some breath work is helpful for most people, and that doesn't have to be complicated. It can just be in to the count of 5, hold to the count of 5, out to the count of 5, just that classic box breathing.
Yes.
Gentle music is helpful for some people. Unfortunately, like people like you can do all of that and they still struggle. I think that which comes back to this kind of binary worldview of medicine. There's some people that just do everything right and they're still anxious or they're still depressed or they still don't sleep.
I mean, I definitely don't do everything right. Like I said, the relationship is not one that I'm proud of. It's like we both abuse each other, me and sleep.
Yeah, so I think
I get what you're saying, like
habits.
Yeah, it's true.
Healthy
like
habits.
I'm not saying I do all that stuff and I still don't sleep. It's just like there's always this like tension, which is already like a problem because you think I've done everything and I'm still not going to sleep. So obviously you're not going to because you've now convinced yourself of that outcome.
And it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because now you're anxious that you're not going to fall asleep.
So yes. No, that's tricky. Really good. I like what you're saying is make it a habit. Like you put your kids into their routine. Do the same for yourself. Parent that sleep self.
Yes,
in a way.
I mean, I think that the way that we treat our children so often is so much more tenderly than we treat ourselves and our adult counterparts. And so you wouldn't let your child smoke or have a bottle of wine before bed. And so I think the same should apply to self-care.
Yes, no, that's true. And then you also mentioned, like, I liked what you said, like going for a walk, like touch the earth every day. It's such a good, just put it on your list of stuff to do, to have some like earth time connection with the ground.
Yeah, so putting your bare feet on grass for 10 minutes a day is actually clinically proven to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. So your nervous system has got an accelerator and a decelerator. In fact, all the systems in your body do. And we tend to stay in accelerator mode and we call that sort of our fight or flight, and then your decelerator is your rest and digest. And so often people that are pushing too hard and not resting and restoring enough struggle with things like rest and digest. So they often have lots of irritable bowel type syndrome issues and their guts don't work very well. And it's because in order to go to the loo effectively, your body needs to be calm and relaxed. And so stimulating that system is really important. And bare feet on the ground, a cold shower.
For only 10 minutes. Oh,
only 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Cold showers do it too.
Okay.
Staring at bodies of water. I mean, we know that intuitively. There's a book that's come out recently called Awe by, I think his name is Keltner Datcher, and it's all about documenting the science of awe and wonder. And he talks a lot about how these kinds of experiences can be measured as responses in the brain. So I think, like I said earlier, the science is certainly catching up to the more airy-fairy ideas that we all know intuitively are true.
Yeah, that's true. Last night we were at a bonfire, and honestly, we could have watched that fire burn for ages.
Same,
it's
exactly.
Amazing how you can watch it.
And I think that's part of our primitive history. Yeah. It's in our genes to gather around a fire and to be quiet together. I don't think there isn't really room for that in a modern world.
Yeah, I think it's actually frowned upon, if anything.
Yeah, exactly. Those hippies gathering around their fire.
Or going to a body of water is
it's not lucrative. How do you monetize that?
How do you monetize bonfire attendance?
Exactly. Maybe there's an opportunity for us there.
Let's capitalize on it quick before anyone else does. Make fire a commodity. But no, that is true. Yeah, so it's okay. So thank you for that. I think that is really where like you guys do shine as a practice as well. Is like that whole family health aspect, because it's the family unit that needs to do these things, right? It's not just mom must go for a walk, and then it's best if it's done like connected. Like say you said you had your family meal, and then you go for a walk, and then you wind down in that way as a family.
Absolutely,
so
and I think we need to model for our children. Anxious parents raise anxious children, and that's something that we see so much of. All these young children on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds, and when you look at the whole family structure, they're not the only ones who are medicated. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there isn't a time and place for these kinds of medicines. But I think that they're probably overprescribed, and it's a symptom of that lack of connection, that lack of slowing things down, that lack of time together.
Yeah, and I always feel overwhelmed whenever I hear these things, just because from the perspective of it does feel like it's all on you and you're in your silo. So like you must be the model, but you're like alone again, because we're not in like that village kind of vibe. So it's like, it's always like, oh goodness, it all comes back onto like the mom or the dad or the family again. But I think if collectively we do have like a sort of value system of modeling these things, it's much easier. If you see other people doing it and you hear about it, it's like you feel like you can also model those things.
Yeah, and maybe to create little villages. I think kind of you're so good at that, of connecting with people that are like-minded.
So I've mined people like gold from the earth to be the village, but it's like it's tough. It's really not easy because of the way we live in our silos. Like it's not easy to now make a village in a silo, but I guess you try your best to do that. And then I mean, so you cater for women, men, and kids in your practice. Like that's why I say it's like so family oriented. And then you guys also have like a corporate wellness side. So like what is the purpose of that, and why do corporates need wellness?
What we're really hoping to do this year is to package wellness for smaller businesses. Large corporates generally all have contracts with large employee assistance programs, so that if you are suicidal or struggling financially, or you have an emergency, that you have access to a kind of call center. And what we've tried to package, or what we have packaged, is like a little bouquet of services. And for a business that's sort of between 40 and 80 employees, where not everybody has medical aid, you might buy vouchers for GP consultations and a few psychology sessions and a wellness webinar once a month, and what else do we do? An ergonomic assessment or a mental health screen.
Yes.
And you kind of put in your basket whatever your business needs, and we provide that on an ongoing basis. And I think it just gives employees a sense of being a little bit more cared for.
Yeah, I mean, that is huge. Like, it goes back to that, mental state is like, if you know there's, you feel like you're cared for, you will function better. And yes, a lot of it is like talking to yourself, that you care for yourself and loving yourself. But I think if your employer goes the extra step and brings that like corporate wellness element to your work, it really can do a lot to boost the morale and of the employees and make people actually want to work there.
And to normalize asking for help. I think that's something that we need to do a lot of work around, especially as Africans. I mean, I think that in Zulu there isn't even a word for anxious or depressed. And so there's a lot of destigmatization that we need to do around people who are struggling mentally, being able to reach for help without feeling judged or less than.
You know, this is the first I've ever heard that in like African culture and language, there's like no word for sort of feeling anxious. I honestly think it's because there was like, I might be wrong, but like when you're living in the village, as the African model is, you probably don't experience those levels of anxiety. So you don't have a word for a thing that didn't exist in your village setting. And I actually would have thought, I feel like with the African culture, maybe you don't even ask for help. It just happens because there's this connectedness. I only actually figured out how to ask for help like in August last year, the age of 37.
Well done.
It was Miguel. Like I asked for help from an editor.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's something that I think especially girls are hardwired not to ask for help, to be self-sufficient, independent, and get on with it, and to sometimes suffer in silence. So I think it sort of crosses all segments and cultures, but it's certainly something that I think we need to change.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, ask for help. I just like to phrase it like outsource. Just sounds sexier. Outsource. Ask for help and get help where you need it the most. Yeah.
Hey there, you! Yes, you! The one who's got a whole lot to say.
The one who loves to learn and share about what they've learned and teach others about the things that they know.
You should start a podcast.
And no, you don't need your own recording studio. You can start your own indie podcast. It's now easier than ever to get on the air and make it sound great.
Oh, and don't worry if you don't know what to talk about, or you're confused about the tech, or if you don't have the foggiest idea of where to start. Because we're going to be giving you a podcast jumpstart.
Yep, we've crammed everything we've learned about indie podcasting into a comprehensive and fun 90-minute workshop just for you.
With an awesome pack of bonuses like a tech checklist, a podcast production process, and a finances tracker.
This is the information we wish we had had when we started our own indie podcasts.
Oh, to think of all the time and money we could have saved!
Now, with our podcast Jumpstart, you get to fast forward your podcasting journey, get onto the airwaves quicker, with way less effort and expense than if you had to go it alone. We've got your backs.
No, there's no need to go it alone. We'll be your new indie podcasting buddies. I'm Shelley Tonkin-Smith, host of the Playful Mompreneur podcast and co-host of Two Booked Up and Simply Biz Besties. Those are three very different podcasts with very different goals. I started podcasting in 2020, which in podcasting terms is a whole lifetime ago. So I've got lots of tips and a few best kept secrets to share with you.
I'm Carla Tenza, host of the Free to Be Curious podcast, and I consider creativity to be my oxygen. I cannot imagine life without my creative oxygen in the form of my podcast. I'm so excited to share a few of the lessons that I've learned and my passion and excitement for podcasting.
Now the best part is that we've kept Podcast Jumpstart super affordable. For just 197 Rand, that's about $11 US, you can get that video workshop and a transcript of the workshop if you'd prefer to read.
And all the bonuses. We have 3 checklists for you. A podcast startup checklist, a tech checklist, and a podcast production checklist.
So what are you waiting for? Sign up for Podcast Jumpstart.
And then in terms of like the holistic wellness focus, there's such a big focus, we've mentioned it so many times in this conversation, about mental wellness. And when it comes to this topic, there are so many well-researched like clinical applications for things like psychedelics and hallucinogens, and advances in research and new research coming out around those things specifically related to helping with mental wellness in the modern age. And I remember you referred me to a book a few years ago which was called How to Change Your Mind, and it was so good. It was like literally how to change your mind, like with chemicals in that way. And so I know that book mentioned in the past that this was a direction that medicine was taking. What is your opinion on that whole, philosophy about medicine in that space?
Thanks for that question. So I think this is a really exciting conversation that's happening in medicine. And in fact, my most recent post in the Mail and Garden was on psychedelic therapy. So if you want a deeper dive, you can read that. We can post it in the show notes.
Yeah, we will.
But I think that if you just look back at the history of the war on drugs in the sort of 60s and 70s, where the American government clamped down on these kind of free-thinking, exploratory individuals who were exploring psychedelic drugs, the political response and the global response, even in South Africa, was one of instilling an enormous amount of fear in people around mind-altering experiences. And I think that we need to do some work in undoing that, because most people who haven't been exposed to books like How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, there's a really nice Netflix series called Fantastic Fungi for anybody who's interested in learning more.
Yeah.
And there's Paul Stamets, who's a pioneer for this kind of research and information. I think we need to unlearn some of our responses to the word psychedelic or the word trip. And once we've done that, then we can take a step back and we can look at how these drugs have an enormous potential, or a confirmed potential, for something called synaptogenesis in the brain. So I always like to tell my patients that you can think of your thoughts, your mind as this kind of ski slope, and your thought patterns as these entrenched pathways where your skier can slide down the hill. And people are habitually stuck in negative looping habits where they're going down the same pathway daily around all different kinds of areas of their life. And where psychedelics are really interesting and helpful, and where I think that they're going to crack open a whole new horizon in the mental health space, is that they help. An experience of using these medicines helps you to see different ways down the slope. And so it helps you to forge a new way forward. So it helps you to rewire your brain, essentially. And I think that, this is an idea that I was very privileged to be raised by my parents in the way that they think about things, because I was always schooled in this idea that your thoughts are really powerful, and the way that you think is really powerful. I love this idea that your thoughts are these kind of energetic bodies that get released into the ether, which comes back to what you were talking about, the vibration of how you say something.
Yes.
And so I think that how we think and how we speak is so powerful and has a measurable impact on our cellular well-being and how we're feeling in the world. And so I think that there's enormous potential for these drugs opening new pathways for mankind in a way that they haven't been present before.
I just think it's amazing. I mean, like that book, reading that book actually changed my mind, because I did need that deschooling. I think I was totally ignorant about those drugs and how they'd been labeled as something bad because of the ban and the war on them. But when I read that book, I mean, the guy had jam-packed that book with all the research that had been taking place, actual studies to help people feel better. Like, it literally went and changed their mind. Like you say, those ski paths went and changed their mind. And like I once did like a CBT course, and the lady said, similar to you, ski slopes, she said it's a forest in your mind, and you've got these paths that you've like hacked out. And if you want to make a new path that's like not the negative one and the positive one, you have to go and like literally hack away that whole forest. And that can take you a lifetime. But if you had the help of something else.
Practice. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to keep it up every single day. Yeah.
So I think that there are lots of non-chemical options for forging new pathways in the brain.
Yes.
But I think psychedelics are kind of a fast track. So if you do breath work for hours and hours and hours, you'll probably get to the same place.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we're all wired for a bit of instant gratification. And so this is a really fast ticket to opening those doors. I think it's important to say, though, that whilst there's a revolution happening, and I think these drugs are going to change psychiatry, that, like we said before, some people just do everything right and the brain is still unwell. And I think that there's a time and a place for where psychedelics can be helpful. And for people who've got entrenched psychiatric pathology or who have been on medicines for a long time, going cold turkey and experimenting with plant medicine is something that needs to be respected and done in a very cautious way.
Right. I think that would be good if it was in this sort of medical model. At least you would know you were in the hands of someone who
and I don't
hold the
think
space for you.
Yeah, I don't think it's there. I don't think we're there yet. I think that, what's interesting is that ketamine, which is an old veterinary tranquilizer that we use in anesthetics, has been used off-label for quite some time now in what we call psychedelic-assisted therapy, where you receive quite a significant dose of ketamine either intravenously or intramuscularly, and you have a trip or you experience this very significant altered state. And in up to about 60% of people, you have an almost immediate relief of symptoms of anxiety and depression. And that lasts anywhere from days to about a month. And so the challenge of that is it can't be administered in a pill. And maintenance is quite an arduous and expensive process. But I think that ketamine's probably opened the door to psilocybin and other psychedelic compounds in this arena. And there's ketamine clinics popping up all over the place. where you can go and
Really
have this
and truly.
experience. Yeah.
So you
There's
can
one in-
actually have access to that currently. It's like currently available.
It's currently available. So I think the
Okay.
latest rules are that you need to be assisted by somebody who's got a diploma in anesthesia. My personal feeling is that's probably overkill. We
Is
use
it? Oh,
ketamine
interesting.
in casualty to reduce fractures in children or put in a few stitches because it's quite cardiovascularly safe. And there's no risk of stopping breathing like there are with some of the other anesthetic drugs. And so I think it's
Yes.
in the right hands, it's quite a safe drug. What's interesting is that historically we used to think that the actual trip itself was part of the rewiring process. I read a study recently where they blocked the opioid receptors in the brain. Your opioid receptors are the receptors that things like codeine or morphine or heroin would act on. And they administered the ketamine, and the person still had quite a significant altered state experience. And the relief of symptoms following the opioid block were not as significant as somebody who had had the drip without the opioid block. And so it's not just about the trip experience. There's probably lots of neural networks that are being modulated or affected by these drugs. And we're only just beginning to unlock what that means.
Like, it's such an exciting time actually to be alive, to come to think of it, that this kind of thing is actually happening. So what current access do patients have to these kinds of therapies that can literally change your mind? You said the ketamine clinics, which they're open and you just go and book an appointment?
So whilst there are clinics where you can make an appointment and receive a ketamine infusion, in fact, I've even had patients tell me that there are people administering this for stress, which I have sort of mixed feelings about. On the one hand, they're facilitating a psychedelic experience in a controlled, safe environment that might open doors of perception in your mind that might be life-changing. But on the other hand, I don't know, I'm talking myself in and out of it while I'm sitting here, so maybe I'll change
Yeah,
tack.
I think stress, it's like, I see what you're saying. I think I see what you're saying is like perpetual stress is just not good. Like, you need to deal with the stress triggers and make changes in your life.
Yes,
but if you
exactly.
have underlying anxiety, it's this underlying thing that's just with you. And even if you change your stress, you still have those anxieties. So treating the stress is just like, it's lazy. Like, go deal with the stress thing.
Exactly. So I think that generally when we talk about anxiety, it's an irrational kind of anxiety. It's not anxiety because you've had 40 coffees and you're working a 16-hour day.
Yes.
It's anxiety because you are getting 8 hours of sleep, working a normal day, and everybody loves you and you have no financial stress, but you're still an anxious wreck all day. That's anxiety.
Right.
Anyway, so I think that there's a gray area about where this is appropriate and where it's not. But it is accessible in those kinds of clinics. And I think that my recommendation would be, if this is something that you explore, that you do it with somebody where there's actually a therapist involved to hold space and to debrief after the psychedelic experience, so that you make sure that you're hacking through the right area of the forest, because psychedelics can take you to quite interesting places in your mind. And I think without the right hand holding, sometimes it might lead you astray. And so everything has its shadow. And I think that reverence for all drug taking of any kind, pharmaceutical, plant, Chinese, I think whatever medicine we're administering, we need to have reverence for it, because there is always a shadow.
Right. No, that makes so much sense. And I think you sort of answered this question, but my one thing I was going to ask you are, who are the kinds of candidates for these sorts of treatments? And you said, it's not just for your general, stress, do make some lifestyle changes, because I think this is more for people, like you said, who've got these underlying conditions that are holding them back, because even though there are factors in their life that are good, they're only seeing a very negative side of everything. So what kind of candidate would qualify?
So I think that because it's still off-label, which means it doesn't say on the package insert that this is recommended for treatment-resistant depression, for example.
Yes.
I can't make any hard and fast recommendations, but generally speaking, only 30 to 40% of people with severe depression respond to conventional antidepressants. And so for people who've exhausted all kinds of other avenues, this is certainly an avenue that should be explored if one can afford it. And
Yes.
we've given this sort of disclaimer that it's not for everybody, but on the other side of a deep psychedelic experience, there's also microdosing. And this is also not something that's yet in the sort of public space, but is definitely, or in the legal space, but it's definitely happening. And that's using a sub-perceptual dose, a tiny dose of something like psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, in an effort to lift mood and reduce anxiety. I read once that these kind of medicines act more like amplifiers than blockers. And so it will amplify your experience and take you to the places where you need to do the work rather than blocking a pathway to inhibit an outcome. Which
Right,
is
so it's the
often how
opposite, yeah. That's how the
pharmaceuticals work.
pharmaceutical drugs would work, is like block that thing that's giving you the trouble, and this is like amplify the path to the solution.
Yes, which I
It's
think
totally
often
fascinating.
which needs hand holding and facilitation. And I don't think it's going to be long before these drugs are legalized, purely because I think there's a lot of commercial gain for somebody, and
course.
also just because they're so helpful. And I think that on a collective level, what's exciting about this is that nobody has it's unusual to have a psychedelic experience and feel more disconnected from the people around you. It usually augments your feeling of care for others. And so maybe it will help us to shift this collective individualistic experience that people are driving.
I love that. I hope that it really comes to fruition, that it's legal and accessible and will change, just do a collective change on our feelings about each other and the way we interact with each other. So,
and
thanks for sharing
regulated,
that.
so that people know what they're getting and they don't have to be afraid. And that there are
that's
trained
important.
practitioners who are able to facilitate this kind of medicine.
You are dispensing it in the quantity that is right for each person, and you're not getting your information like on the sly because it's currently legal and you don't know what you're doing, which is a dangerous thing, you would say.
Exactly.
You wouldn't want people to be experimenting like that. So thanks. The one thing I just love about hearing you talk is like the way that you share information, and you've been doing so much of that in the social media space, and both Miguel and I follow your Instagram like religiously. So I wanted to ask, why have you gone that route and like diversifying in a way into social media and knowledge sharing that way?
So I'm probably a little bit ADD, and I get bored quite easily. Yes. And so it felt, and I would love to live by the sea. So it felt like an opportunity to force myself to learn, to improve my communication, to hopefully build a little bit of an audience that could move with me to the sea one day, so that I wasn't starting from scratch somewhere. And also just because I think that there's so much lousy information in the social media space and mind-numbing, repetitive nonsense. And so if people are scrolling, they may as well be building their brains and building their self-care and empowering themselves to look after their bodies better. So I was killing a few birds with one stone. I've generally always been a little bit uncomfortable about sort of the self-promotion in that space. But when I got my head around the fact that I wasn't necessarily promoting myself, I was just promoting information, then I saw it differently, and I really enjoyed the process of making content. So thank you for appreciating it.
We do. We love it. And like, I also feel the same about Free to Be Curious promo stuff. Like, I found it so hard in the beginning. And then I also had to sort of reframe what I was doing. It was like, I know such incredible people with such amazing stuff to share who have inspired me and changed my life for the better. And I want to share that with a lot of people. And
absolutely,
it does change the way you view it. But I still do have quite a few moments of like discomfort around it, because it's very different to sit in front of your computer and talk to like thousands, millions of people.
Yeah,
it's different.
And then I suppose it makes you vulnerable. It makes you vulnerable to judgments.
That's the worst part.
It makes I think that one of the challenges of social media is that any troll can come and poo-poo you or disagree with what you say. And so by putting yourself out there, you make yourself vulnerable to that potential. And I think that's brave, so well done.
Yeah, thanks to you too. I mean, we are loving your videos. The best ones of your videos for me are the ones when something comes up with kids and like super relevant information in about 2 minutes. about something related to raising kids. And like you're a mom yourself of young kids and a doctor. So like I found those videos especially relevant. Like you've done one, there was one on a fall on the head. One of my best. Because I think you panic when your kids hit their head.
Yeah, I mean, my husband and I often reflect on how lucky we are to have my knowledge in the context of parenting, because it's so much less stressful knowing when to worry and when not to worry. I've got so many friends that have deep anxiety when there's a fever or a snot nose, and it's not necessary. 99% of the time it's viral, it's self-limiting, it will pass even if you do nothing. And so knowing red flags is something that we can empower all moms and dads to familiarize themselves with.
That's right. There was even one with a rash. Like you did one with a rash, and you said if you press down and the rash disappears, like you're safe, with various other caveats that you mentioned. And if you don't, like head straight to the doctor. Don't think twice about it.
Yeah, I mean, what's tricky about these videos is you've got 90 seconds to make your point, and you've got to get your disclaimers in as well, just so that nobody comes and tells you that you killed their child with meningitis.
Oh my gosh. How terrible would that be?
But there are lots of tiny little cheats that just knowing that about a rash is extremely helpful.
Yeah, it changed a lot of stuff for me. Like, it really did. And then I also wanted to ask you, how do you manage to do it all? Like, you're balancing being the mom, running a practice, and you've got, like, this Instagram presence. So how?
Oh, Carla, I have an amazing business partner that entertains all of my whims and fancies. And she relaxes my responsibilities when I have a whim that I want to go and follow. So that's one part. The other part is I have a lovely nanny, and so I feel like my baby's in good hands when I'm not home. It's difficult, if I'm really honest. There are days where I want to be at work more, and there are days where I want to be at home more. But I'm in a really privileged position that I generally am home most afternoons, and I do a lot of catch-up at night, which is not great for romantic time. But I try and schedule that into. I'm a big advocate for date night, even if you're exhausted and you really don't feel like it. You're always happy that you did it afterwards. Yeah. So it's a tightrope, and sometimes you're making it work, and sometimes you're not. I think that compartmentalization is something that I'm particularly good at. So when I'm at work, I'm at work, and when I'm with my children, I'm with my children. When I'm making a reel, I'm making a reel. My husband always rolls his eyes, because when I'm doing something that's not what he wants me to be doing, I actually can't hear him.
You've blocked him out of that compartment.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it makes me able to do quite a lot of different things and not feel overwhelmed.
Right. I saw you had a quote up, I think. It was a quote. It wasn't a reel. It was pink. And you said, you think the way to living successfully in the modern world is actually compartmentalization. And when you said that, I went and compartmentalized my diary. And like Miguel will know, I'm behind on some stuff that we're working on and podcast stuff. But so in that compartment, I'm not feeling confident. But in like the other compartment where I had deadlines, it's like compartment tick. And so I sort of changed my diary to compartmentalize after seeing it. And
I think it changes your perspective, because if you're not doing well in one compartment, it doesn't mean that all the other compartments need to suffer.
Yes.
You can leave that lag and deadline in its place and still enjoy the fruits of your other labor.
And not let it bring you so down that you can't start another compartment or finish a compartment.
And not let it spill into the others, because...
that feeling. Yeah, because demoralizing feelings like that vibration, it could take over your whole diary easily.
And your whole headspace.
So I like that. Yeah, so it's so funny you say like you can't even hear him when you're doing the other thing. But I mean, that's like compartmentalization for the win. But that means when you're with your husband and your kids, you hear them instead of hearing all the noise. So there's like the flip side is really amazing.
The flip side, exactly.
I'd like to get more to that flip side, that when I am with my kids and my husband, I'm not worrying or thinking about all the to-dos that are like sitting right here. So I need to work on that. And okay, so just going back to your practice for a minute and talking about how you did all, your practice is so much more than your medical knowledge. Like you said, you're running a business and you're running it here in South Africa. So I like to ask all my brilliant South African guests, like, what starting and running a business in South Africa is like, and then what's keeping you in this country despite all the complexities and things like lack of service delivery and load shedding. What's
Oh,
keeping
Carla,
you
I was
here?
when I was driving to work this morning, I was sort of reflecting on the potential that you might ask me that question, because I'm not having a particularly optimistic week about it. And
Yes.
I do think that we're in for difficult times. I hope that there's enough wonderful humans with the right vision to change that eventually. But it does feel really hard at the moment. And generally speaking, I'm not a person that worries about what's on carte blanche or even watches the news.
Yeah,
Because if I
I'm
can't do
surprised to hear
something about
this.
it, if I can't fix it, I don't want to know, especially if
Me
it's
neither.
gravely awful. But my husband watches a lot of news, and so he's generally my news bulletin. And I don't know how he survives carte blanche every Sunday night
Yeah, I don't
because
know,
it's just
actually.
so grim.
I don't know.
But
It's
I
grim.
think that
Yeah.
we all just have to carry on in our little pockets doing the best work that we can do. And I think that the mass exodus makes more adversity and opportunity for people who are innovative. I think we need to innovate ourselves out of this poverty-stricken state. We need
Yeah.
to change our work ethic. I'm not feeling very optimistic today, and I can't lie. So,
That's
so I think I'll
okay.
probably
Don't
leave
lie.
it
Be
at that.
yourself.
But I
Yeah, that's
suppose
okay.
I get a little bit of comfort in that, all the people that work with us are having a positive work experience and are able to take care of their families well and have support. And I think that the more of us that can provide those sorts of environments for other South Africans, the better.
Yeah, that's so true. No, that's a great takeaway. It's like to expect to be positive every day, especially that's why I asked the question. Like we're living in such a complex time with so much adversity. It's like unreasonable to expect that. But I think you're right. The glimmer of hope is that people keep doing what they're doing in their pocket, in this case their silo, but doing it well, and that will hopefully spread. Yeah, I mean, like the glimmer of hope I see is like when I drive around and I just see so much construction and energy being put into building, like literal building. And that's like my hope is like there's a faith that there's space for all those buildings and construction and workers and people going to be doing a job in that building one day.
Yeah.
So that gives me hope. And also, I mean, I also have a strict rule, but luckily Daniel also has this rule, like neither of us watches the news or listens to the news. So it's so funny, we're so in the dark that if somebody asked me the other day if I'd heard the sonar, I thought they were talking about sonar from a bat. And they were talking about the State of the Nation address. I was like, is there a bat? Like, I want to hear the bat sonar. Like, I know it's so funny. I have tears in my eyes, but honestly, it's what's keeping me sane because there is nothing I can do about what is in the news. And even closer to home, in the news lately, there's a lot about this Bella bill to do with education. And we follow a self-directed education approach, and our kids are not in a mainstream school. I mean me and my family, and people were getting stressed about it, and I was like, until that is actually passed by the Constitutional Court in South Africa, I'm literally not worrying about it.
Yeah,
if something
I
like
think-
that can constitutionally get approved with our great constitution, then, yeah. Anyway, you were saying you think?
No, I think that if we can uphold our constitution endlessly, that we'll probably be okay in the end.
Yeah, that's true. We do have an amazing constitution. And then, okay, so Skye, you've got such a great, like, holistic view on the world and this thing called existence. Have you got some advice to share with all of us that you've received, whether as a mom, as a doctor, as a student, that influenced your choices and has stuck with you?
Just, Carla, that's a big question. I think that there's so much wisdom, and I think that the wisdom is everywhere. And maybe the simplest answer to that question is to look for the wisdom. Because if you look for the wisdom, you're going to find it, and you're going to find what's most relevant to you at this moment. But I think that balancing all the different areas of your life where you need to invest is probably the simplest overarching principle for me. So look after your body, look after your mind, look after your marriage, look after your sacred partner, look after your children, look after your work relationships, look after all these different pieces, because they all come together to create a contented existence. And if you neglect one or more than one too much, I think that everybody suffers and all the different compartments suffer.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it is. It's so holistic. And if there's one piece of advice you could give for wellness, what would that be?
I think it would
If
be
it's
to
not the same as
exercise.
above.
I think it would be to exercise every day and not to eat processed food. That was that for me is so simple. So often people, I ask patients, okay, so what are you eating? And then they tell me they had KFC for dinner with a Coke. And I just want to fold over in tears, because the fact that people are eating KFC and drinking Coke in 2023 is just an anomaly.
Yeah,
So
it is surprising.
Don't eat something that you don't know how it was made, or you didn't make it yourself, and don't drink sugar, and make sure that you use your body every day. We were not evolved to just sit and stare at screens.
Right, that's so true. I like that. I think it's also an easy one, is like, it's not too complicated. Cut out everything processed. Like, you'll be left with so much delicious stuff, and you also won't be touching all the processed stuff, which usually, if it's processed, contains things like vegetable oils, sugars, and like things that are just bad for you anyway. So it's not natural for you, and it's full of chemicals. So if you just cut it out, you're pretty good. You don't need to know, avoid this E number and avoid tartrazine and avoid MSG, like just avoid processed stuff.
Yeah, so
I
eat
think
the
that's
fruit,
great.
don't drink the juice.
Yes, I loved your reel about the juice. I mean,
don't eat the apple bar. If it comes in a shiny wrapper, it's probably not in the form you were intended to eat it.
Yes, how to understand, like, I mean, it goes back to sort of understanding the food that your body wants to receive and can use is not the one in the wrapper. That's work for your body. It will take something from it, but you're giving your body so much work. And if you yourself could go back to your 20-year-old Skye, what advice would you give her?
Wow, I think that I would tell her to be less fearful and more confident, and I think that one of the things that I'm leaning into in my maturity is networking and connecting with people who I might find intimidating or scary, because that's just my own insecurities talking. And the more people that you can connect with in a meaningful way, the richer your experience is. And I think that the more opportunity you create for yourself. And so the 20-year-old Skye would probably have stayed home or hid in the corner. And the almost 40-year-old Skye is going to go and say, "Hi, I'm Skye, what's your name?" So I think I would encourage people to reach out to others more and to meet as many interesting humans as you can.
I love that. I really love that. And thank you for sharing those beautiful pieces of advice, like straight from your heart. So if people want to find you, and where would they find you and your practice and your social media? What are all the links?
So I practice from our Santon practice, which is on Fredman Drive, and you can book an appointment online at healthwithheart.co.za. Okay. And I'm also launching a podcast soon, which I'll share on Instagram.
Great, Skye. Oh,
so that's exciting. And thank you for inspiring me and pioneering, Carla.
Such a pleasure.
So that's going to be really mostly around all the kinds of practices that about wellness, collective and individual wellness, with an integrative lens in all its different manifestations. So I'm really excited about that. And then my Insta handle is at Dr Skye Scott, Dr just Dr Skye with an E on the end, Scott.
Okay, we'll put all of those up. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, thanks, Skye. Thanks for your time. I'm so excited that you're starting a podcast. That's phenomenal. Yay, we need stuff like this. Like, I know I would be consuming that content.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need South African voices.
We do. And, like, I love the reels, but it's not enough. I mean, like, I love them.
90
They've got their
seconds
purpose,
is very short.
It's short. I would love to hear you, as a doctor, unpacking something with an integrative lens in the wellness space for longer. So,
well, it's coming soon.
Yay, that's amazing. Amazing. Thank you for your time and for sharing everything with us.
Thank
for being
you
so
much.
generous.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending this time with me. I love getting to know my listeners. So please do subscribe to my YouTube channel and on your chosen podcast app. Engage with me in meaningful conversation on my comment-friendly blog, and send me an email to share your self-directed life story. My website address is thefreetobecuriouspodcast.com, and my email address is carla@freetobecurious.com. I really look forward to getting to know you.